Don't show up in the photos. It'll ruin the family's image. That's what my mother said at my sister's graduation. I just left and never came back until the wedding day. When I walked into the hall, my mother froze. Everyone wanted to take a picture with me, subscribe to our channel, and watch until the end. Because this story doesn't end the way you imagine. I used to think silence was safer than speaking. That if I just stayed quiet, if I didn't laugh too loud, didn't ask for too much, didn't stand too close in photos, I wouldn't ruin things. I wouldn't ruin her. My mother. She raised us alone after our father left. I was 6, my sister was 4. He walked out after dinner one day and never came back. My mother didn't cry, not once. She just said, "We're fine. We don't need him," and poured the leftover stew into the trash like it had offended her. After that, she changed. Or maybe she revealed who she really was. She started treating everything like a performance. Holidays, school events, even church became moments to prove to the world that she hadn't lost anything. That we were still the perfect family, just smaller. And in that performance, there was only space for one daughter to shine. And it wasn't me. My sister, Melissa, was everything she wanted. Blonde hair, delicate voice, top of her class, always smiling. I wasn't. I had our father's features. The same dark hair, same intense eyes. Every time she looked at me, it was like I reminded her of what she'd lost, or maybe of who had left her behind. She didn't hit me. That would have been easier to explain. She just edited me out of the picture, literally and figuratively. Birthday cards addressed only to Melissa. Family photos where I was told to wait by the car. Dresses bought for one child. Compliments reserved for the other. And the worst part, I believed I deserved it. When you're a kid and your own mother doesn't see you, you start to wonder if maybe you really are invisible. Maybe your presence is something people endure, not enjoy. So I learned to shrink myself. I smiled less, spoke softer, disappeared quicker. I did well in school, but never mentioned it. I kept secrets. My first crush. My first period. Even when I got into college, I didn't tell anyone for weeks. I knew the response would be lukewarm at best, or redirected back to Melissa somehow. But nothing hurt like that day. It was Melissa's high school graduation. I was 20 by then, in college, and already working part-time to cover the things my scholarship didn't. I bought a new dress for the occasion, a soft lavender one with sleeves and a little belt. It was the first dress I'd bought with my own money. I was proud of it. Proud to show up, support my sister, maybe even be part of a decent photo. But when I arrived, my mother pulled me aside before I could step near the bleachers. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "You're not in the family photo." I blinked. What? She smiled, that cold, rehearsed smile she used for teachers and neighbors. "You don't match. It'll throw off the colors. Melissa's photos are going to be displayed at the party. Don't take this personally. It's just image matters." And that was it. She turned back toward the photographer, motioning to Melissa and a few cousins. I just stood there, holding my purse, the little belt on my dress suddenly feeling like a rope around my ribs. My hands went numb. I could still hear the shutter clicks behind me as I walked back to the car. I didn't cry until I was halfway home. And even then it wasn't loud. Just that kind of crying where your body doesn't know how to hold it anymore, and it leaks out of you like water from a crack in the wall. I didn't call her after that. Didn't go to Thanksgiving. Skipped birthdays. No one asked why. Melissa sent me one text. "You're being dramatic." I didn't respond. Something inside me shut off that day, but something else turned on. I stopped waiting to be invited. I stopped hoping she'd see me. I started seeing myself. I poured myself into my studies, graduated early, got into a postgraduate program focusing on social psychology and trauma. Funny how the people who break you can sometimes also push you toward your purpose. A year later, I gave a talk on inherited silence, how some families pass down shame instead of legacy. Someone filmed it, uploaded it online. It went viral. Not millions of views viral, but enough. Enough for emails to start coming. Invitations, podcasts, panels. People told me I said things they'd never had the words for. They called me brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt like someone who had spent her whole life being erased and finally picked up the pen. But I never went back home. Not once. Not until the wedding. That part I'll get to soon. All I'll say for now is this. My mother always believed image was everything. She thought hiding me made the family look better. She thought pushing me away would make the rest of them shine brighter. But when you spend your whole life trying to disappear, and then one day you finally decide to show up, the world notices. Even the ones who tried to keep you out of the frame. The first holiday I skipped was Thanksgiving. I remember sitting in my small apartment, eating pasta from a mug because I didn't feel like doing dishes and staring at my phone. No one had called, not even a text. The silence wasn't shocking, but it was heavier than I expected, like standing in a room full of ghosts, memories of people who were still alive, just not present. I told myself I was fine, that it was peaceful even. No fake smiles, no biting my tongue while my mother praised Melissa's new internship or latest boyfriend. No walking into a kitchen where I wasn't needed. But even peace can ache when you're not used to it. I bought a small plant that weekend, a fiddle-leaf figure I named her Nora, and she sat in the corner by my window like a quiet witness. I don't know why, but taking care of something living made me feel more alive. Like I could rewrite the rituals I never got. No family dinner? Fine. I'd light a candle, read a book, water Nora, and call it a tradition. Christmas came. I sent cards to a few professors, wrapped a gift for my roommate. I didn't check Instagram that day, but later someone forwarded me a picture from Melissa's page. Our mother, dressed in red, smiling beside a perfectly decorated tree. The caption said, "Grateful for my beautiful family." I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't even in the caption. That was the moment I realized I was being erased in real time. And no one seemed to mind. So I made a decision. I wouldn't just move on, I would move forward. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Not to hurt them, but to heal myself. I threw myself into work, took extra internships, volunteered for research projects, helped first-generation students navigate college life. Every hour I spent building something outside that house was like laying bricks on the other side of a collapsed bridge. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew I was done trying to repair what they kept breaking. Still, sometimes the silence screamed. On birthdays, I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, waiting for a phone call that never came. On rainy days, I'd catch myself thinking about the sound of my sister's laugh echoing down the hallway when we were kids, before competition and favoritism poisoned everything. You don't stop loving people just because they didn't love you right. That's the hardest part. The love sits there, stubborn, refusing to leave even when you beg it to. And grief is what fills the space where connection used to live. But I kept going. A year passed, then another. I graduated with my master's, got a job at a nonprofit that focused on mental health in underserved communities. My supervisor, Celeste, was the first person in years to ask me, genuinely, how I was doing. She listened when I talked, remembered details. On my birthday, she brought cupcakes and sang, even though I told her not to make a fuss. One afternoon, she invited me to speak at a local event about trauma and identity. I almost said no. What did I have to say that anyone hadn't already heard? But I went. I stood in a room of strangers and told them about being the invisible daughter, about what it means to shrink yourself so small that even your own family doesn't notice when you're gone. I didn't cry. I just told the truth. And when I finished, people stood. One woman hugged me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." I thought it was just me. That talk changed everything. Clips from it made their way online. I started receiving emails from women across the country, mothers who regretted how they treated their daughters who had finally cut ties, sisters trying to rebuild trust. Somehow, my story became a mirror for people who had no words for their own pain. And in reflecting their grief, I found something I hadn't expected: purpose. I still didn't hear from my mother. Not when my article was published. Not when my name appeared in a small column in a local magazine. Not even when Melissa reposted one of my quotes without tagging me. But I kept going. I traveled to a few cities to speak, joined a national campaign about emotional abuse in families, helped launch a mentorship program for girls who'd grown up in homes where love was conditional. And through all of it, I carried a quiet question inside me. If she saw me now, would it matter? Would it change anything? Part of me hoped so. The other part had already buried the hope. Then one afternoon, while walking through a bookstore downtown, I saw a bridal magazine on the shelf. On the cover, Melissa, beaming in white, hair curled, arms wrapped around a man I didn't recognize. A headline read, "Local couple plans spring wedding at historic estate." That was how I found out. No invitation. No call. No mention. They hadn't changed. And yet, I had. I put the magazine back, smoothed the cover like sealing a chapter. The old me would have cried in the parking lot, would have replayed the silence on loop. But that day, I went home, lit a candle, watered Nora, and made myself a cup of tea. Because this time, I wouldn't be forgotten. I'd show up, but not for them. For me. I used to apologize for everything. For talking too much. For not talking enough. For having an opinion. For existing in a space someone else thought I didn't belong in. Sorry, I'd say, even when someone else bumped into me. Even when the silence at the dinner table wasn't my fault. Even when my mother's sharp words carved through me like glass and I still tried to make her comfortable. Somewhere along the way, I started thinking that taking up space was selfish. That if I was too visible, too loud, too me, I was disrupting the image. Her image. The one she curated so carefully. The perfect single mother with her perfect daughter. And the other one? The one she didn't talk about much? I was the shadow in the frame, always on the edge of being cropped out. But then something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming match. No breakdown. Just a quiet moment in an elevator. I had just finished a meeting with a board of directors at the nonprofit. It had gone well. I'd made a case for expanding a program for adolescent girls, and the room had actually listened. One of the directors, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a soft voice, said, "You have a clarity when you speak. People lean in when you talk." And I smiled. I said, "Thank you." But then I followed it with, "Sorry if I spoke too long." She tilted her head. "Why would you be sorry for being heard?" I didn't have an answer. And for the first time in my life, the silence that followed wasn't suffocating. It was clarifying, like she had held up a mirror and I saw the weight I had been dragging around my entire life. That need to shrink, to explain myself, to apologize for being the daughter who didn't fit. That night, I went home and looked through old photos. The few I had, a couple from middle school that Melissa hadn't torn, a grainy shot from a birthday party where I stood behind a balloon arch, my face half hidden. I looked small in everyone, not just physically, but emotionally, like I had trained myself to fade into the background before anyone could tell me to. So I started a list, not of things to do, but of things I was done apologizing for. I wrote, "I'm not sorry for being different. I'm not sorry for not being Melissa. I'm not sorry for outgrowing what tried to erase me. I'm not sorry for wanting peace more than approval." It became a habit. Every time I caught myself saying sorry for simply existing, I'd stop, replace it with thank you or nothing at all. And it felt like reclaiming parts of myself I didn't know were missing. I started wearing colors I was once told clashed with my skin, took photos of myself and didn't delete them, shared my ideas in meetings without second-guessing. It wasn't vanity. It was visibility. A quiet refusal to be edited out of my own life. Around that time, I was invited to give a talk at a women's conference. The theme was becoming who you needed. That hit me hard, because I realized I had needed someone to protect me, to say you belong. And no one had. So I became that woman. For myself. For the girls who came after me. I stood on stage in a room full of strangers and told them what I'd never dared say to my own mother. You don't need to shrink to be loved. You don't need to match someone else's version of beautiful. And if they can't see your light, don't dim it. Stand closer to someone who can. The applause felt like air in my lungs, like oxygen after years of holding my breath. After the event, people lined up to speak to me, not because I was famous or flawless, but because I was honest. One woman about my age said, "Your story gave me language for mine." I didn't know how to explain the quiet rejection in my family until today. And I nodded. I knew exactly what she meant. The kind of pain that doesn't come from being hit, but from never being fully embraced. That night, I got a message request on Instagram. It was Melissa. 4 words. That's all. You looked really confident. No hi. No, how are you? Just that. And I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I thought about everything I could say. About the nights I cried alone. The holidays I spent rebuilding myself from the ground up. The silence that had taught me more than her words ever did. But I didn't reply. Not out of bitterness. Out of peace. Because I didn't need her validation anymore. I had stopped living for the approval of people who only clapped when the spotlight wasn't on me. That was the day I stopped apologizing. Not just with my words. With my choices. With the way I stood taller in rooms that once made me small. I had learned that healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it's the absence of longing, the ability to walk away and not look back. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do. Care about yourself. And if that makes me too much for some people, I'm no longer sorry for that either. My last name used to feel like a bruise. Something I'd flinch at when teachers said it out loud or when doctors asked, "Any relation to Melissa?" I used to answer with a shrug, like I didn't know. Like I wasn't sure if I still belonged to them, or if I ever did. But something changes when you stop living in the shadows of other people's pride. When you realize you've spent your whole life trying not to embarrass the people who were never proud of you to begin with. It started small. Someone tagged me in a post on LinkedIn. Just a thank you note after one of my workshops. I didn't think much of it until a week later I got an email from a university professor asking if I'd speak to her graduate students about family trauma and identity formation. She said she'd watched my talk on YouTube and called it quietly devastating in the best way. I reread that line 5 times. Quietly devastating. That's what growing up in my mother's house felt like. Being hurt without evidence. Diminished without words. But now that same experience had turned into something useful. Something people leaned into instead of looking away from. And my name was starting to travel without me. A journalist reached out for a quote on an article about the long-term effects of parental emotional neglect. She introduced herself like I was someone important. "I've been following your work. Your voice adds something that's often missing in these conversations." And when the article came out, there it was, my name. In print. In bold. No footnote. No parentheses. I sent a copy to Celeste. She framed it and put it in the office hallway. A few weeks later, I got invited to a panel discussion in New York. Big event, well-funded, streamed online. I said yes before I had time to be afraid. When I walked onto that stage, I wore a navy blue jumpsuit and heels that clicked with purpose. And when they introduced me, the applause started before I even opened my mouth. That was the moment I realized something. I wasn't hiding anymore. I had spent years trying to be invisible because I was told that my visibility ruined the picture. That I was too plain, too intense, too not Melissa. But now people took notes when I spoke. Now people saved my quotes and emailed me long paragraphs about their lives. Now people asked how to pronounce my last name, and then they remembered it. The irony didn't escape me. The name my mother tried to silence had become the one that people started to repeat. Not Melissa's, not hers, mine. It wasn't about fame. I didn't want to be famous. I wanted to be free. And recognition, I learned, can be its own kind of freedom. Not because you need others to tell you who you are, but because after a lifetime of being unseen, being acknowledged reminds you that you're not crazy, that you do in fact exist, and that you matter. I never bragged about any of it. I never sent updates home. I didn't feel the need to, but people talk, and I knew it was only a matter of time before word got back to her. One day, I got a message from an old neighbor, Mrs. Klein. She used to live 2 doors down from us when I was a kid. She wrote, "Saw you on the internet today. Always knew there was something in you that couldn't be quieted. Your mom must be so proud." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Your mom must be so proud. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't know how to explain that pride wasn't something my mother ever offered me. And even now, if she saw my face on a screen, it wasn't pride she felt, it was discomfort. Because my presence meant her version of the story couldn't be the only one anymore. Her silence had shaped me, yes, but now my voice was louder. One day, at a cafe near my apartment, I overheard 2 women talking at the next table. They were discussing a podcast. My podcast. One of them said, she said this thing about invisible daughters and how silence can be just as abusive as yelling. It messed me up in a good way. I didn't interrupt, just sipped my coffee, feeling something crack open in my chest. Not pain, not pride, something quieter, more solid, peace. Not because I'd won anything, but because I no longer needed to explain myself to be understood. I was finally living in a life I didn't have to defend. Later that week, I got an official invitation to an award ceremony. A local foundation was recognizing women making an impact in emotional health and community care. My name was on the list. There'd be media, photos, speeches. I closed the email and laughed softly. Photos. How ironic. The girl who was once told not to ruin the family pictures, now being asked to stand at the center of the frame. And the best part? This time, I wouldn't be edited out. I wasn't surprised that I didn't get an invitation. By then, I had stopped expecting things like that. I'd learned that sometimes, family doesn't forget you out of carelessness. They leave you out on purpose, because your presence reminds them of things they'd rather not face. Guilt, shame, truth. Still, the way I found out stung more than I'd like to admit. It was a Friday evening, and I was sitting on my couch answering emails when a message popped up from an old classmate. We weren't close, just the kind of person who still followed me online because we shared math class in 10th grade. She wrote, "Your sister looks stunning in her engagement pics. Didn't realize the wedding was so soon. You must be excited." And that's how I found out. Not from Melissa, not from my mother, but from someone who hadn't spoken to me in years and still assumed I was part of the celebration. I clicked the link she'd sent. It was a wedding website, one of those sleek, pastel-colored ones with a countdown timer and a playlist suggestion for guests. Melissa and her fiancé, Darren. The photos were everywhere. Her in a white, flowy dress, barefoot on a beach. Him in linen pants and a practiced smile. And in the bridal party section, my name wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. I wasn't a bridesmaid. I wasn't even a guest. They hadn't just erased me from the family album. They'd rewritten the whole script. For a moment, I just sat there. Not sad, not angry, just still, like my body couldn't decide what to feel yet. Then, quietly, like a wave coming in, the ache settled in my chest. Not because I wanted to be at the wedding, but because somehow they still believed I was the one who didn't belong. But here's the thing no one tells you about becoming your own person. Once you stop asking for permission to exist, rejection stops being a cage. It becomes a door. And I decided I was done standing outside it. I didn't plan anything dramatic. No revenge speech. No look at me now moment. I just marked the date in my calendar. May 14th, a Saturday. I booked a hotel near the venue. Quiet. Simple. I even called ahead and asked if guests could attend the reception if they weren't on the official list. The woman on the phone said, "If you look like you belong, no one asks questions." That stuck with me. If you look like you belong, no one asks questions. I thought about that sentence for days. Growing up, I had mastered the art of looking like I didn't belong. Slouched posture, apologetic smile, eyes that never met the camera. I had carried that energy into adulthood, even when I didn't mean to. But not this time. This time, I would walk in like the room was mine. Like my story didn't need anyone's validation to be true. I'd wear something that made me feel like light, not to prove anything to them, but to remind myself that I had always been more than the roles they assigned me. The week before the wedding, I got my hair done. Not a dramatic change, just a deep treatment, soft waves, a shine that caught the light when I moved. I bought a dress that hugged in all the right places. Navy blue, elegant, understated, the kind of dress that didn't scream for attention, but whispered, "You'll remember me." And still, part of me wrestled with doubt. Was I being petty? Was I walking into something that didn't need my presence? But then I remembered every holiday passed over in silence. Every family group photo I was told to step out of. Every word that was never said. Every moment I was treated like an afterthought in a story I helped write. No, I wasn't being petty. I was being present. On the day of the wedding, I arrived just before the reception began. The ceremony had already ended. Perfect timing. I stood outside the venue for a moment, just breathing, letting the air settle around me like armor. Then I walked in. The lighting inside was warm and golden, chandeliers sparkling like melted stars. The guests were laughing, clinking glasses, music playing soft in the background. I moved through the crowd without hesitation, offering small smiles, nods. No one questioned me. People turned. They looked. Some did double takes. A few whispered. I could almost hear them thinking, "Is that?" And then, "She looks amazing." And then I saw her. My mother. She was across the room, mid-laugh, a glass of champagne in her hand. And then her eyes landed on me, and everything stopped. Her smile faltered. Her hand froze. For the first time in my life, she didn't have anything to say. Because, in that moment, I didn't need her to. I didn't walk toward her. I didn't wave. I just held her gaze for 3 seconds. Long enough to say, "I see you, and you can't unsee me anymore." And then I looked away. Someone asked to take a photo with me. Then another. And another. Funny, isn't it? The girl who was told she would ruin the family pictures was now the one everyone wanted in the frame. But I wasn't there for the photos. I was there to show myself that I could exist in the same space as the people who tried to erase me and not flinch, not shrink, not apologize, just stand. And I did. I didn't think it would be the dress that changed the room, but it was. Not because it was loud or extravagant. It wasn't. It was simple, really, navy blue, fitted at the waist, with a neckline that whispered elegance instead of shouting for attention. The fabric moved like water when I walked, catching the light in soft waves. I had chosen it because it made me feel powerful without armor, beautiful without apology. And when I stepped into that reception, every conversation seemed to pause for a beat. Not because they recognized me, but because they didn't, at least not right away. It was like they knew they were supposed to know me, but couldn't quite place me. I watched them try to connect the dots, the way their eyes flickered with curiosity, surprise, discomfort. I saw the silent math happening in their heads. Is that Melissa's cousin? A friend of the groom? Wait, is that? And then they knew. But by then, I was already walking deeper into the room, my shoulders relaxed, my gaze steady, every step saying what years of silence never could. I'm not who you remember. I'm not who you thought I'd become. I am more. People started approaching me, politely, cautiously, complimenting the dress, asking if I was someone famous. One woman said, You must be the bride's friend from college. She didn't mention you, but wow, you look incredible." I smiled and thanked her. I didn't correct her. Because what could I say? No, I'm not the bride's friend. I'm her sister, the one who wasn't invited, the one their mother taught them to forget. Instead, I let the moment be what it was. A disruption, a shift in the script. The bride and groom were across the room, caught in the middle of polite conversations and photo ops. Melissa hadn't seen me yet. Or maybe she had and was pretending not to. That would have been just like her. Keep smiling. Keep sipping. Keep control. But control is fragile when the narrative starts to crack. I moved toward the bar slowly, not because I needed a drink, but because I needed a vantage point. I wanted to see it happen, to witness the exact moment the image she had so carefully curated began to slip. And then there it was. She saw me. Her hand tightened around her bouquet. Her smile faltered. It was barely noticeable, but I caught it. Because I know that face. I've studied it my whole life. The moment something doesn't go her way, there's a flicker in her eyes, like a wire snapping inside. And then she looked toward our mother, who was already staring at me, not moving, not blinking, just staring. It was the same look she gave me the day of Melissa's graduation, the same look she used to give our father when she thought no one was watching, like she was measuring how much she could endure before she cracked. Except this time, she was the one who didn't belong. She looked at me the way someone looks at a ghost they weren't ready to face. And I just stood there, not smiling, not confronting, not asking for anything, because that was the real power of it all. I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't need to win. Just being there, standing tall in a dress that made people turn was enough. Enough to remind her that I had survived without her. Enough to show Melissa that no matter how many photos she curated, there would always be one memory she couldn't control. This one. Someone asked for a photo, then another. Then someone asked, "Would you mind if we took a group one with you? You just have this energy." And I almost laughed, because that was the thing I had been punished for my whole life. My presence, my energy, my refusal to disappear quietly. And now it was being noticed, admired, centered. I let them take the photo. I stood in the middle, relaxed, unbothered. And I knew Melissa saw it. The camera flashes weren't just capturing a moment, they were rewriting history. And this time, I wasn't edited out. I could feel my mother's gaze the entire time. Heavy, sharp, but she never approached. Not even once. Because what would she say? You weren't supposed to come? You look different. I didn't think you'd dare. She didn't need to say anything. The silence between us said everything. That she hadn't changed. That she still thought she could control the story by pretending I wasn't in it. And that now she realized she couldn't. When I turned to leave, I didn't make a scene. I didn't wave or look back. I just walked out the way I came in, quietly, confidently, completely, because I hadn't come to be seen by them. I had come to see myself. One last time. In that room. In that dress. Not the version of me they tried to hide, but the one I had fought to become. And she looked back at me from every reflection, every flash, every passing glance with one truth I could finally hold without shame. You were never the problem. You were just never meant to be small. I didn't stay long after the first round of photos. Not because I felt out of place, but because I didn't need to linger. I had already done what I came to do. Or rather, what they never thought I'd have the courage to do. Exist, fully, in the middle of their moment. And yet, I wasn't the one who disrupted the evening. They were, with their silence, their stares, their inability to pretend everything was fine once I walked through that door. People noticed, not just me, but them. The shift, the tension, the sudden stillness around the table where my mother sat, frozen, her smile plastered on like a mask she forgot how to hold in place. Melissa standing beside her new husband, visibly stiff, as if trying to keep the corners of her perfect day from fraying. And the more they tried to act natural, the more unnatural it all became. One guest leaned toward me and whispered, "I'm sorry, but who are you?" There was no malice in her voice, just curiosity, a genuine kind. And for the first time in years, I didn't stumble over the answer. "I'm Melissa's sister." She blinked. "Oh, I didn't know she had one." I smiled, soft and even. "Most people don't." And just like that, her face changed, as if a fog had cleared. I saw the questions flash across her expression like subtitles. Why weren't you mentioned? Why weren't you in the ceremony? Why does no one seem to know? I didn't explain. I didn't owe her, or anyone, a history lesson. But I could feel the shift starting, the slow unraveling of the story my mother had worked so hard to stitch together. Because now there was a thread pulling loose. Me, the forgotten daughter, standing at the center of conversations she was never meant to be part of. It wasn't just the guests who noticed. It was the photographer, too. At one point, he came up to me and said, "Do you mind if I get a few more shots? The lighting here is perfect." I laughed, genuinely, because the irony was almost poetic. The girl who was told she'd ruin the family pictures was now being professionally photographed by request. I agreed, not for vanity, but for closure. The flash went off, bright and clear, and I didn't flinch. I didn't adjust myself, suck in my stomach, tilt my face for approval. I just stood there, straight, still, whole. And in that exact moment I saw her, my mother, across the room, watching it happen. Her face didn't move, but her eyes said everything. She had lost control of the frame. It was subtle, but I knew it. The way a pianist knows when a single note is off. The way a dancer feels a misstep in her bones. She knew the image she had tried to craft for years was crumbling. Not because I ruined it, but because I existed outside of it. And now everyone could see me. For real. And the more people approached, the more others began to ask who I was, why they hadn't heard of me, why the bride had never mentioned a sister. I didn't feed the drama. I just smiled and let their questions hang in the air like perfume, undeniable, lingering. Melissa eventually passed close to me. Not by choice, it was the flow of the room. For a split second, our eyes met. I waited for something, a nod, a word, even a whisper. But she just kept walking, her jaw tight, her posture perfect. She wanted me to feel small again, uninvited, temporary. But it was too late for that, because the story had already started to rewrite itself. Not with vengeance, not with confrontation, just presence. I think that's what unsettled her the most, that I didn't come to fight. I didn't come to beg. I didn't even come to be acknowledged. I came because I could, because I had every right to walk into a room that once tried to shut its door in my face and leave it open behind me. And that kind of quiet power, it rattles people more than rage ever could. As I made my way toward the exit, a young girl, maybe 17, caught up with me. She'd been part of the extended family, someone I didn't recognize. She said, "I just wanted to tell you, you looked really strong tonight." I paused, looked at her, and I saw it, the uncertainty in her eyes, the hunger for someone to show her that being overlooked wasn't the same as being unworthy. So I told her, "Thanks, and you will too, when you stop shrinking to make other people comfortable." She nodded, holding that sentence like it was a secret, and I left. No big goodbye, no farewell toast, no need to make a point. The point had been made the moment that flash went off, and she couldn't pretend anymore. And I think she knew that photo would live longer than any frame she tried to curate. Because this time, I wasn't edited out. I was the moment. She found me by the hallway. I had just stepped away from the noise of the reception, into that quiet space between the music and the exit. I wasn't trying to hide, just to breathe. A few guests passed by, some still buzzing from champagne, others carrying small plates of cake. I leaned against the wall, letting the cool air calm the warmth still sitting in my chest. And then I felt it, the change in temperature, the weight of someone standing too close without making a sound. I turned. It was her. My mother. She looked smaller up close. Not in stature, but in presence. The way someone does when the story you've been telling about them your whole life suddenly loses its script. Her shoulders were back, chin lifted like always, but her eyes, they weren't sharp anymore. They were searching. Not for me, she knew who I was, but maybe for the version of me she used to control. I said nothing. Neither did she. And that silence had said everything. I had played this moment in my head 100 times over the years. The dramatic confrontation. The perfect lines I'd rehearsed. Maybe even tears. A whispered apology. A hand reaching out. Closure. But when it finally happened, there were no words. Only breath. Stillness. Years of distance standing between us in a 10-foot hallway. She opened her mouth once. Closed it again. It wasn't hesitation. It was defeat. Because she realized something before I even had to say it. Whatever she was going to offer, whatever version of truth she was ready to hand me now, it was too late. She had already missed the chapters where I learned how to live without her voice in my life. The ones where I found my own. Where I stood in front of audiences and said the very things I used to swallow in her kitchen. Where I was no longer waiting for her to give me permission to matter. She couldn't catch up to me anymore. So we just stood there, two women bound by blood, by history, by everything unsaid. And for a moment, I let myself remember. The Christmas mornings I wasn't in the photos. The birthdays she forgot. The day she asked me to stand out of frame because I didn't match. The years of being the wrong kind of daughter. I remembered how hard I tried. How quiet I made myself. How I used to lay awake at night, wondering what it would take to be loved loudly. And I remembered the exact moment I stopped asking for it. That moment was now. Because here she was. And I didn't want an apology anymore. I didn't need it. What I needed, I had already built for myself. I looked at her. Not with anger. Not with hope. Just clarity. And I could tell she saw it too. That this wasn't about making peace. It was about acknowledging the war had ended. And she had lost something more than just control. She had lost the chance to know me. To truly know me. Not the girl she edited out. Not the version she disapproved of. But the woman who had turned that rejection into power. Into purpose. Into presence. She took a breath. A shallow one. I could see her trying to summon something. A sentence. A gesture. A place to begin. But there was no beginning. There was only the end. And I gave it to her in the softest way possible. I nodded once. A quiet, final gesture. Not of forgiveness. Not of welcome. Just recognition. I see you. I remember everything. And I'm not waiting anymore. Then I walked past her. Not slowly. Not dramatically. Just forward. Because that's what healing looks like sometimes. Not fireworks. Not revenge. Just the ability to keep walking without needing anything from the person who once held your voice hostage. I didn't turn back. Not to see if she followed. Not to check if she cried. I had done that before. And this time, I wasn't leaving empty. I was leaving whole. Outside, the air was cooler than I remembered. Crisp, almost clean. I stood for a moment beneath the string lights draped across the garden. I could hear the music, still playing faintly through the walls. Someone was giving a toast. Laughter spilled through the open door like a memory from another life. But I didn't feel excluded. I didn't feel like a stranger. For the first time in years, I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. On the outside, yes, but on my terms. Because I didn't come to be let in. I came to walk away differently than I ever had before. And I did. I didn't take a single photo that night. Not with my phone. Not for keepsakes. Not even to prove anything. I didn't need proof. Because sometimes the most unforgettable moments aren't the ones you frame on a wall. They're the ones that stay pressed inside you, like fingerprints on glass. You don't see them, but you feel them every time the light hits just right. That night became one of those moments. In the days that followed, people kept sending me messages. Some from guests who had been at the wedding. Others who had only seen pictures floating online. I didn't post anything. I didn't tag anyone. But somehow my presence spread. A journalist who had interviewed me months ago reached out again. I heard you made quite the entrance. You've become a quiet symbol for something bigger, what it means to reclaim space in places that once made you small. I didn't know how to respond to that. I wasn't trying to be a symbol. I was just trying to breathe, to walk into a room and not feel like I had to disappear. But maybe that's the whole point. Maybe that's exactly what makes someone unforgettable, when they stop asking to be seen and simply decide to be. Melissa didn't reach out, neither did my mother, and I was fine with that. I didn't need explanations. I didn't need apologies, stitched together by guilt. I didn't even need closure. What I needed was what I had finally given myself: permission to stop chasing people who had no intention of catching me, to stop standing at the edges of their stories, hoping to be written in, to start telling my own. The dress I donated the following week. Someone else would wear it now, and maybe they'd feel a fraction of what I felt in it. Strength without sharpness, beauty without performance, belonging without permission. But there was one thing I kept. One photo. It was sent to me by someone I barely remembered, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd snapped it quietly on her phone from across the room. I hadn't even known she was there. In the image, I was mid-laugh, hair over one shoulder, head tilted slightly, hands relaxed at my sides. A sliver of warm light from the chandelier caught the curve of my jaw. I looked present, fully there, not trying, not posing, just being. And I realized that was the photo I had waited for my whole life. Not staged, not filtered, not directed by anyone else's comfort. Just me, standing in the center of a moment they never planned for, and becoming the part no one could forget. I saved it to a folder on my laptop called Proof I Survived. Not because I needed the reminder, but because I wanted something to look at on the days when the old voices crept in, the ones that still whispered, "You don't belong." Because now I know better. Belonging isn't about being invited. It's about knowing you never needed the invitation in the first place. I still get questions from people who knew me back then, who watched from the sidelines, who remember the version of me that used to shrink under her mother's gaze. They ask, "How did you do it? How did you change so much?" And I tell them the truth. I didn't change. I just stopped apologizing for who I already was. Stopped waiting to be chosen. Stopped asking to be loved in a language they never spoke. And started loving myself in one they couldn't translate. The last image that stayed wasn't a photo. It was a feeling. Walking out of that venue, night air against my skin, heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks to a sentence, I finally finished. No one chasing me. No one trying to stop me. Just me, moving forward without flinching. I don't know if I'll ever speak to my mother again. I don't know if Melissa will ever stop pretending I'm a footnote. But I do know this. There's power in being the one they didn't see coming. There's healing in showing up anyway. And there's freedom in knowing that no matter how many photos they took that night, no matter how perfect the cake or how expensive the dress, the image they'll remember most was the one they never planned for,